On the surface, Nullscape can be summed up with one image. This is a real depiction of how this game feels to play when you're just starting off and trying to understand what everything is in Nullscape. It's pretty overwhelming, especially if either A, you're starting your first ever runs by yourself, completely missing the learning curve that comes with Nullscape's team building, due to it mainly being a team game in the latter portions of runs, or B, joining a random lobby already past early game. Early game Nullscape is a tricky subject. There's a lot of things that go into planning the starting stages of a game like Nullscape, specifically being the collectathon roguelite genre, more specifically the roguelite side of this experience. There's a fine line in between what should be a struggle and what should be easy, or the certain upgrades and unlockables allowing for understanding and growth in skill in this game. Objectively, this game should be played with others, and I think that's something they truly understood when making the final product. It's a great game to go ping your friends and hop in casually for an hour or two while the game's flow feels constant and progressive when done with 4 or more people. And the average run being about 8 players makes sense, especially with how big these maps can get later. Teamwork, even if it doesn't feel like it, is a big detail in this game I feel like people take for granted. Whether it comes down to the last Robloxian standing, or arguing over altars, people don't really pay attention to others unless it's a themed run, like the Scarfs or the Celestial. Now, obviously this doesn't apply to everyone, but a majority of people usually don't have anyone to play with, so hopping into a random lobby usually makes the most sense. And when that is the norm, beginners of Nullscape tend to struggle, due to being thrown into a round they may not truly understand yet, witnessing horrors beyond their current comprehension. This game should have a tutorial, I think personally. Even if it wasn't just for myself, I think others would benefit too, especially with how many features are in this game. Now, a big inspiration of this game is a little roguelike I like to call Risk of Rain 2. Now, I've definitely played this game. You know, maybe just a little bit of my time given to this game. Not a lot, but you know. And that game, for example, doesn't have a tutorial. It plops you in, straight up in a vulnerable state, with plenty of monsters that have already spawned in. This tactic is known as trial by fire. Lots of games use this tactic, because in the roguelike genre, it's better to get your ass kicked than to have it held very gently as you're told what to do. Nullscape takes this, and basically tar and feathers you as well, while pinning a kick me sticky note to your back too. Now, by any means, this would infuriate most people, but somehow this game, that does it really well. This game is so fundamentally different than all of the other games surrounding it because of how grounded its logic is. The developers of this game truly understand what they're making, especially with the monsters and adversaries from Nullscape. Along with Trial by Fire, we have Trial and Error, which can be very much shown off by the monster bias in this game, specifically in this video's topic of early game. The first 2 stages you'll be given a finite amount of what you can choose, either being Mart, Belle, Baby, ICBM, Springer, and Husk. If I show you, yes you, average Nullscape player, this image, what are you choosing? I think I know what you're gonna choose. Monster bias isn't inherently an issue, but I think when it adds onto the hate for early game, it is. Early game is known for its slow pace, once again mirroring Risk of Rain 2. Both games in both scenarios have very high adrenaline moments at the peak of their stages that come crashing down to reality after entering the next stage. In both games, the first 2 stages are completely sluggish, and that's reasonable. You're allowed to dislike early game progression, especially when it's not as polished as the other half of the game. But what you're not allowed to do is ignore it. Having to enter early game again is a punishment. It's a reminder to do better. It grounds you as a player, and allows for a slow residual buildup of hope in that little twinkle in the player's eye to resurge when you finally get Grace Wings again. You shouldn't immediately leave a lobby because you have to start over again. In the past week, I've seen this countless times firsthand, and the players searching for only late game lobbies and ignoring early game is a little something I like to call party crashing. Party crashing is pretty much the equivalent of knowing you're dealing with players who think they're too good to take it slow every once in a while. Now, I'm not saying it's a terrible thing to join a lobby every now and then that it's already past post early game. That's fine, by all means go ahead. But the people who join, bash the host, and flaunt either emotes or rank in game to get what they want make me want to choose Void Baby 4 times in a row. This is kind of a side tangent, but Nullscape did add a feature that you can't join super late anymore or you won't get credit for rounds, so that's really cool. But nonetheless, that doesn't really help my philosophy here, so let's move on. Most people, aside from the party crashers, avoid early game like it's got cooties, and it puts bad logic into the beginner's brains that this game fundamentally is bad. And it somehow makes people write really nasty comments about Nullscape on platforms. I don't know why people are so mean about it. I really don't like this. Most runs really don't get started until very late. So it makes sense as to why this game has garnered a culture around later game. And obviously, as I said earlier, this doesn't apply to all, just the people that see the big level number and the amount of players and only choose those with no regard. Of course, there's already ways of stopping this type of thing. You can create code-only servers, but when the average starter doesn't have people to do that with, it becomes a problem for their growth in this game. Now that the baseline of this video has been touched upon, let's go into more detail of other things I'd like to talk about as a newbie to this game. I think a really good way of making early game a little more enjoyable is to give players what they want. And that is with this new class idea I had while playing for the first time. Now obviously this is just my idea and the devs should not listen to me and do not take my idea into account for anything. So with that out of the way, let me introduce to you the platformer. The main gimmick is, you're good off the bat, so how are you going to combat this after the game starts to catch up with you? Just like Wanted and Prisoner, Platformer would start off with extra speed, but with additional extra jump height as well, possibly an alternative of the advanced gravity coil. Most movement-based upgrades would be nerfed due to the class's new array of movement techs, like long jump, that could be performed resembling a grounded dive, but with less vertical and horizontal lift. This would help cover larger gaps between early stages where collecting gifts becomes boring and takes up a lot of time. A backflip, which would give major air verticality, allowing to reach higher areas in less time than most other classes, probably matching the same usefulness as other players' grappling bounce pads. And other things like a sidestep jump, which would launch you in the opposite direction when your player character would change their direction on the ground. A wall jump for high rises in multi-layered pathing, and a consecutive triple jump. For style points, of course. If you can't tell, this is obviously based around Mario 64's moveset, and like that early game Nullscape's movement already plays as such. I think this would be a perfect in-between for default classes and the classes that are becoming a new age meta of the game. Whether you believe this idea is underwhelming or too overpowered, a class that can easily balance the in-between of early to mid stage would be beneficial to everyone, possibly even becoming a new power meta. Because I'd bet my last 2 trip coins, there's plenty of people out there that want to style on these adversaries instead of avoid them. Platformer, or a class like it, would allow for the players who aren't fond of early game to quickly and stylishly catch up to where they were comfortable beforehand, allowing for more replayability in the same lobbies. Or solo runs, which is a great segue into my next point. Nullscape, obviously being a game made for a well-sized party, lacks when it comes to players who would rather run by themselves. And in my opinion, a game can only be so hard before it starts to lose its charm. Hi, this is Editor Me. I know this kind of sounds like a contradiction, how I said earlier that the game does hard really well, but there's still a line to these things, so, you know, yeah. And when the game of Nullscape relies on balancing current monsters between players in a party, the solo players in their private lobbies tend to struggle. And now, don't get me wrong, it's 100% possible to play by yourself, but it's also 10 times as hard, now having to focus every single enemy on yourself instead of being evenly distributed like I said before. The classes in the game so far, if not counting Prisoner and Wanted, are very good. Charger is a great example of this, but more or less being better for casual runs. Grappler and Glider both bring whole new techs to the game that take avoiding enemies to a whole new level. And Spirit is great for collecting gifts in tricky situations, while also having a last-ditch effort to escape the most risky of plays. One thing that would specifically help with solo runs and alike would be to overhaul the amount of scaling they have going on for solo and as well as duos and trios. The reduction they have right now, including the price and alter scaling, is pretty spot on. It makes sense and is comfortable, but at the same time, the progression through each level stays the exact same, mirroring full party progression still. The added scaling for solo and duo feel like they didn't truly take into account how the flow of the game feels when not playing the intended way of the experience. Of course, obviously having a mode for it shows some sort of understanding on how lower player runs should play, but doesn't exactly translate these thoughts well. Solo runs of Nullscape shouldn't feel like they take longer than group runs. The game should have a way of making the pacing feel more entertaining and understanding. And I think a heavy tweak of the scaling system for specifically duos and solos would really help the player base feel more comfortable with smaller grouped runs, because at the end of the day, this game could be really peak in my eyes if it catered to both extroverts and introverts. Overall, Nullscape is fun. I have lots of fun playing this game, especially with my viewers or smaller groups with my best friends. The game is super polished, but what is a game without a couple hiccups? Buff glider, by the way, it feels too heavy. But that's basically everything I wanted to talk about in my first week of playing this game. Let me know your opinions on Nullscape and the takes I had on my first week of playing. As always, I've been babasmind, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.